Hi, this is Andrew Koss at the studio at Strawberry Fields Lane. This video is going to cover some of the techniques I like to use to mix vocals, keep them focused in a mix, and create that silky, airy, buttery sound we hear on so much radio and TV film music. A lot of vocals today have these qualities, but there's no harshness. They don't feel brittle or piercing. So I've always found that most engineers have their go-to favorite plugins and hardware, and you'll see throughout this video that I'm using a lot of the same plugins. It's not that these are necessarily better than any others. They're just the ones that I really like to use with vocals. You know, the choices today are getting incredibly overwhelming. If you look at my plugin choices here, if we just look at EQs, I mean, this list is insane. Now the libraries keep growing. You know, here's some dynamics. It's just the time it would take to learn all of these, and you know, it's just getting so crazy. So how do we get that distinct modern vocal recording? Well, it starts with the microphone, of course, and having the vocalist really close, almost on top of the mic. Of course, by doing this, there are inherent challenges that come along with it. You'll get overly inflated bass response due to the proximity effect, and you'll inevitably have mouth noises, lip smacks, loud breaths. So let's talk about how we treat these vocals in the mix and some of the tools that I use to make it happen. The first song we're going to look at is Evergreen by Maxine Linehan. It's a holiday song that we wrote and released last December. Here's the opening verse.
Brush the snow to the ground from the heavy branches while we walk. Neath a blanket of white, just the moonlight dances. Silence falls all around us like the world is sleeping, waiting on some magic to begin.
So you can hear that really intimate and breathy quality right away. Let's look down here at the vocal bus. Besides my go-to compression and EQs are quite a few other plugins. The air is coming from an airband EQ. Now, there are a bunch on the market now, and I'm a big fan of the Air EQ that is included in the virtual mix rack in the Slate plugin suite. It's called Air EQ. It's basically one knob, super fast, super easy. Let's solo the vocal and listen to it with and without.
Brush the snow to the ground from the heavy branches while we walk. Neath a blanket of white, just the moonlight dances. Silence.
So you can hear that right away. The impact is immediate. So what are the immediate issues we get using these plugins? First off, noise. A lot of it sometimes. All microphones are going to have an inherent noise floor that you're dealing with. In this case, we're recording through a vintage Neumann U47 II mic. It's one of the greatest vocal microphones ever made. It's a legend, but it's old. It's got a tube in it. It's going to have some noise that comes with it. That's just part of the game. So let's see what this Air EQ does to that noise when we listen to an untreated section of the second verse.
All around us like the world is sleeping, waiting on some magic to begin.
Yikes. And here's without that airband on. So denoising your track is going to be an important step in this. And I think anyone who is taking production or mixing seriously should really consider having the Isotope RX plugins on hand. There are other denoising options out there, but I cannot recommend the RX suite enough. So watch how quickly we can use RX to deal with this. We'll pick a section of noise, pull up spectral denoise, set it to high quality, tell it to learn it. There's our noise. And we'll just quickly process this. Now let's listen.
On some magic to begin.
Way more tolerable. And then let's listen to the noise kick back in right there where I didn't process it so you can just hear the difference.
To begin.
Yikes. So denoising super, super important if you're going for this kind of vocal sound. When your singer is so close to the mic, we also have to deal with boosted low end from proximity effect. For that issue, a dynamic EQ is a game changer. We'll cover these EQs more later, but the beauty of a dynamic EQ is that you can find problem frequencies and tame them without cutting those frequencies all the time. So let's look at this Oxford dynamic EQ, and let's focus in on this low end. What I'll do is I'll sweep the vocals to find the problems, and with this one you can see them as well visually. But let's solo this band and listen.
Brush the snow to the ground from the heavy branches while we walk.
And you can see these spikes happening here. Now again, I don't want to do this. I don't want to cut it the whole time because it's going to change the sound of her vocal the whole time she's singing. We just want them to be tamed when they get a little too big.
Brush the snow to the ground from the heavy branches while we walk. Neither blanket of white, just the moonlight dance.
And that keeps it from adding too much mud when we're in the mix here.
All around us like the world is sleeping, waiting on some magic to begin.
The next song we're going to look at is a demo still being developed called Tired Again. In its current demo stage with just bass acoustic guitar and a scratch vocal, we can really hear some of the impact of these techniques in play. First, let's look at the reverb on this song. Finding the right balance of vocal reverb can be a challenge. Sometimes you might want to create a nice warm lush space, but you also don't want to muddy up the vocal either. If the vocal's too dry, it feels harsh, lifeless, like it's lacking dimensional space, but if you go too far the other way, it becomes muddled and you can't understand the lyrics. Let's hear the vocal in context and play with the reverb amounts. It gets nice and intimate here, but a bit dry. We get up here. I like the decay, but it still feels too cavernous. On a quick side here, also remember, don't be afraid to EQ your reverbs. That can really help create some space for them. So a great technique I like to use to find a happy medium is using the vocal to key or trigger a compressor just before the reverb. You can experiment with trying it after the reverb too. What happens is the reverb gets hit with less signal while the vocals are going, and as the phrase ends and decays, the reverb gets hit with more of that signal, giving you the trail you might want, but limiting the excess verb during the vocal phrase. So I've got my vocal bus here, and I've got one send going to the reverb, and I've got another one that I'm using as the key. So let's turn this compressor on. Now I'm using the stock Pro Tools compressor because it's really great with the visual display so that we can see what's going on. I have the vocal key set up here. And now let's hit play and watch what happens. Desperate distractions, not this complex reaction I got. Now watch how the compressor reacts while the vocal is on and at the end of the phrases. I like the fast attack so that we get the reverb out of the way, but the release time lets you play with how much reverb comes back. Now let's listen to this vocal soloed and listen for the ends of the lines. Desperate distractions, not this complex reaction I got. So we get that space at the end. Now let's listen to that same phrase with that compressor off, but just the reverb as it was. Desperate distractions, not this complex reaction I got. This is a really great technique to play with, and small little changes to your settings can really alter the effects you get from the vocal. I would also encourage you to try this with delay. Also on this song, we're expanding on the use of the dynamic EQ to control the harshness of the singer's louder notes towards the end. Let's see that here. 'Cause I'm holding on tightly to bedsheets that might be a nightly reminder of you. I grew tired again. So again, like what we do is we'll solo the vocal, pick a problem frequency and solo it out so we can listen to it and sweep. And right in there, it starts getting a little piercing, and you can see it in the graph. Sometimes you need to work fast, or maybe the dynamic EQ isn't feeling like enough. A plugin like Oak Sound's Soothe 2 can be a lifesaver here. This is one of those plugins I call magic plugins. You could choose to take the time to dive into it, trying to understand how it's all working, but personally, I find it a great example of a plugin that you can find a preset and just dial it in from there. Let's take a look at it. So in this plugin, we can set frequency ranges. You have Q controls, and speed controls. And then depth is basically how much or how less you want it to attack those frequencies. And what it does is it finds these problem frequencies and it smooths them out. It rounds them out. Let's take a listen. Turn it off.
My games, my chains, my shadow grows tired again.
So let's listen to it soloed here, and Soothe will let you just listen to what it's knocking out.
My shadow grows tired again.
Especially towards the end there. The last song I want to quickly cover has a completely different feel. The song is called Wishes by a great Vermont band called Saints and Liars. It's a gritty, bluesy Americana vibe consisting of drums, electric guitar, upright bass, acoustic guitar, and a resonator slide guitar. The singer has this awesome gritty voice, and while the band has an old school feel to it, we also want to keep the recording feeling fresh and modern. So let's take a listen to a little bit of the track.
I saved all my wishes for your kiss, and that's right, I saved all my money to spend on you while you were downtown just running round, and I've been home waiting on you.
Alright, so what's going on here to keep the vocals up front? First, we're utilizing the same idea from the previous song of using the vocals to trigger a compressor, but this time we're triggering the compressor on the electric guitar track. Let's take a listen here.
I saved all my wishes for your kiss, and that's right, I saved all.
So that really cool Fender Telly tone is killer, but it can jump out at times and compete for space with the vocal. So by using the vocal signal to trigger the compressor on the electric guitar, we can push the guitar back. Say, look, it's just 3.4 dB, 3.9 dB. That's all we're reducing it. But when I hit play,
I saved all my wishes for your kiss, and that's right, I saved.
so right in there, when the vocalist stops and the guitar keeps going, you get to hear that really cool little lick. But I don't need to hear all of this stuff while he's singing quite so loud, because it's really going to compete for space.
Kiss, and that's right, I saved all my money.
This really helps keep a really great guitar part present when we want it, but not so much when he's singing, and it saves me a lot of time of having to automate the level of the guitar up and down, up and down, up and down, which would just be a lot more time involved.
I saved all my wishes for your kiss, and that's right, I saved all my money to spend.
Another common vocal technique used here is parallel compression. Essentially, you want to send your vocal to another bus or double the track and then really aggressively compress that vocal. Some compressor plugins have a parallel option built right into them. You can see here, there's a parallel mix knob for wet-dry. So you could essentially add a second compressor to your vocal and set the wet-dry to 50 or 40 or 60. But I'm a big fan of keeping them separate so that you have independent control of that level throughout the song. Let's listen to the vocal level and the parallel level. Take a listen to this. Here's the vocal, soloed.
Yes, and that's right, I saved all.
And now here's my parallel track.
Yes, and
It's a lot quieter.
that's right, I saved all my money to spend on you.
Really smashing it, all buttons mashed in.
While you were downtown.
Here's the original.
Just, running round.
So now let's listen to them in context in the mix and watch what happens as the parallel bus comes in and out.
A long day's work and I come home just to find it's just another night alone. Well, I've had about enough tripping over.
Lastly, for a gritty song like this, a bit of saturation can work wonders. There's loads of plugins out there to achieve this. I'm a big fan of the ones like Soundtoys Decapitator, the UAD Culture Vulture, and then this one, which is the Black Box HG2. It's essentially just a distortion plugin, but you can play with it, and it's definitely one of those let's season it to taste, but boy does it add some punch in a song like this. Let's just listen really quickly.
Well, I've had about enough tripping over your stuff.
I mean, look at that.
So you can find out in the road. I saved all my wishes for your kissing. That's right, I saved all my money to spend on you.
So that saturation really is effective in a song like this. So this was really a lot of things to cover in one video, but I do hope they gave you some insight to possible techniques you might want to explore. If you have questions, comments, techniques that you like to use, please share them with me. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.